In 1820, a French orphan named Martin Fugate settled in the most isolated valleys of eastern Kentucky, in what would become Hazard County. He had skin the colour of a clouded sky, a genetic condition that made him an outcast in civilized society. What Martin didn't know was that his decision to hide in those mountains would create one of the most disturbing genetic mysteries in American history. A mystery that involved not just blue skin, but something far darker that the families involved have tried to keep buried for 200 years. What I'm about to tell you isn't just about a rare genetic condition. It's about what happens when complete isolation combines with desperate survival, family secrets that span centuries, and a biological transformation that challenges everything we understand about human adaptation. This is the real story of the Blue People of Kentucky, the parts that were deliberately left out of medical journals, the testimonies that were suppressed, and the truth about why some of them are still hiding in those mountains today, changed in ways that go far beyond the colour of their skin. Martin Fugate arrived in Troublesome Creek with nothing but a worn leather bag and a secret that had forced him to flee from France. His skin wasn't just pale or sickly looking, it was genuinely blue, like someone had mixed indigo dye into his blood. In Paris they had called him cursed, demonic, touched by evil. In Kentucky's isolated valleys, he hoped to disappear completely. The mountains of eastern Kentucky in 1820 were like another planet compared to the rest of America. No roads penetrated these valleys, only deer trails and creek beds. Families could live their entire lives without seeing anyone outside their immediate relatives. It was perfect for someone who needed to vanish. What Martin found in those mountains was Elizabeth Smith, a pale orphan girl with red hair who lived with her aunt on a failing homestead. Elizabeth had her own secret. Her skin, while not as dramatically blue as Martin's, had a greyish tinge that became more pronounced in cold weather. Her aunt had kept her hidden for years, telling neighbours the girl was too sickly to receive visitors. When Martin and Elizabeth met in the autumn of 1820, it was like two halves of a cursed whole finding each other. They married within weeks before winter sealed the mountain passes. Their isolation was about to become absolute. By 1822, Martin and Elizabeth had 7 children. 4 of them were born with skin as blue as spring violets. The other 3 appeared normal at birth but developed the blue colouring as they grew. The couple realised they were creating something unprecedented, an entire family of blue-skinned people in the heart of America. They made a decision that would echo through the next 200 years. Complete isolation, no outside contact, no one could know what was happening in their valley. The Fugate family property covered 400 acres of the most inaccessible land in Kentucky. Steep ridges rose on all sides, creating a natural fortress. The only way in or out was through Ball Creek, a narrow passage that flooded regularly, cutting them off from the world for months at a time. It was here that the family began to change in ways that went far beyond skin colour. By 1835, the 7 Fugate children had all reached adulthood, and a problem had emerged that would define the family's future. There was no one to marry. The nearest neighbours were a day's journey away, and even if they could reach them, who would marry someone with blue skin? The eldest son, Zachariah, made the decision first. He married his first cousin, one of his sister Mary's daughters. Within a year they had children whose skin was such a deep blue it appeared almost purple in certain light. But it wasn't just the colour that was different. These children could hold their breath for extraordinary periods, some for up to 15 minutes without any sign of distress. They seemed adapted to lower oxygen levels, thriving in the thin mountain air where others would struggle. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because what I'm about to reveal about the second generation of blue people will make you understand why the medical establishment tried to bury this story for so long. Dr. Madison Coween, who would later study the family in the 1960s, found notes from a travelling physician who encountered the Fugates in 1843. Dr. Elias Humphrey wrote in his journal that he had discovered an entire community of blue-skinned people living in complete isolation. But his most disturbing observation was that they seemed to be developing characteristics beyond just unusual skin color. Enhanced night vision, the ability to survive on remarkably little food, and most unsettling, they had developed their own language, a mixture of English, French, and something else, something that didn't seem to come from any known linguistic root. By 1850, the Fugate family had grown to 38 members, all living within the same valley. The inbreeding had intensified the blue coloration to the point where some family members appeared almost navy blue in winter. But it had also created other changes. Their metabolism had slowed dramatically. They needed less food, less sleep, and seemed to age differently than normal humans. Zachariah, who should have been 45, looked barely 30. His blue-skinned children were reaching physical maturity faster than normal, but then seemed to stop aging almost entirely once they reached adulthood. The family had developed a complex social structure to manage their isolation. The elder Fugates controlled all decisions about who could marry whom, carefully tracking bloodlines in handwritten records that they guarded obsessively. They had created their own education system, teaching children to read and write, but filling their heads with a version of history that placed the blue-skinned people as a chosen race, superior to the pink-skinned outsiders who would destroy them if they ever discovered their existence. In 1861, the Civil War came to Kentucky, and with it the first real threat to the Fugate isolation. Both Union and Confederate forces moved through the mountains, searching for supplies and conscripts. The Fugates retreated deeper into their valley, posting guards, creating hidden shelters and caves that honeycombed the limestone ridges. It was during this period that they made a discovery that would change everything. Deep in one of these caves they found other blue-skinned people who had been hiding for generations, the Combses, the Smiths, the Stacys, and the Richies. 4 other families who had been living in similar isolation, all with the same blue skin, all with the same genetic condition that no one could explain. But these families had something else, something that made the Fugates realize their transformation was more profound than they had imagined. The other families had been isolated even longer, some for over a century, and they had changed in ways that defied medical explanation. The Combs family, who had been in the mountains since the 1750s, had developed what could only be described as a collective consciousness. They could communicate without speaking, sensing each other's thoughts and emotions across distances. Their blue skin had taken on a luminescent quality in darkness, a faint glow that allowed them to navigate the deepest caves without any light source. The Smiths had developed different adaptations. Their bones had become denser, their muscle fibers had changed composition. They could climb sheer rock faces with their bare hands, their grip strength measured at 3 times that of a normal human. They had become perfectly adapted to their mountain environment, more like a separate species than a genetic variation. The meeting of these 5 blue families in 1862 created what they would later call the Covenant, a formal agreement to intermarry, to share resources, and most importantly, to keep their existence secret from the outside world. They had seen what the war was doing to the normal humans, the violence, the hatred, the destruction. They decided they were better off separate, evolved, superior. The Covenant established rules that would govern the blue people for the next century. No one could leave the mountains without permission. No one could marry outside the 5 families. No one could reveal their true nature to outsiders. Breaking these rules meant exile or worse. The families created a hidden society within the mountains. They built concealed homes, invisible from the valleys below. They developed agriculture adapted to their unique biology, growing crops that thrived in low oxygen and processed nutrients differently. They created their own medical practices, discovering that many plants affected them differently than normal humans. What was poison to others might be medicine to them, and vice versa. By 1880, the blue people numbered over 200 individuals spread across 5 interconnected valleys. They had developed trade networks using intermediaries, people with the lightest blue colouring who could pass for sick or pale in brief encounters. These intermediaries would trade furs, herbs, and minerals for supplies the community couldn't produce. But even these minimal contacts were dangerous. Stories began to circulate in nearby towns about blue ghosts in the mountains, strange lights, and voices speaking in unknown languages. Benjamin Fugate, grandson of the original Martin, had become the unofficial leader of the blue community by 1885. He was brilliant, educated from the books his grandfather had brought from France, and whatever the intermediaries could acquire. But his intelligence was matched by a growing paranoia. He believed the outside world was developing technology that would eventually discover them. He instituted new policies, guard posts on every approach to their valleys, children trained from birth in concealment and evasion, plans for mass evacuation if they were ever discovered. The children born after 1890 were different again. The concentrated inbreeding among the 5 families had created individuals who were barely recognizable as human in conventional terms. Some had blue skin so dark it was almost black. Others had developed physical features that seemed impossible, joints that could bend in ways that would break normal bones, eyes that could see heat signatures, metabolism so slow they could survive a month without food if necessary. Rachel Stacey, born in 1892, was perhaps the most extreme example. Her skin wasn't just blue, it was iridescent, changing shades depending on her emotional state. She could hold her breath for over an hour, her heart rate dropping to fewer than 10 beats per minute. But most remarkably, she seemed to age backwards. By the time she was 20, she looked 14. By 30, she appeared to be a child of 10. The other blue people were terrified of her, believing she represented either the next step in their evolution or a dangerous deviation that could destroy them all. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, because what happened to Rachel Stacey and the others, like her, is something the government still doesn't want you to know about. In 1903, a geology survey team from the state government accidentally discovered one of the blue community's outer settlements. The team was mapping coal deposits when they stumbled upon what they described in their official report as structures of unknown origin and purpose. But the unofficial report, the one that was classified and hidden for decades, told a different story. They had found an entire village of blue-skinned people who moved with inhuman speed and agility, disappearing into the forest before the team could properly document what they had seen. The discovery triggered panic in the blue community. Benjamin Fugate called an emergency gathering of all 5 families. Over 300 blue-skinned individuals met in a massive cave system they called the Cathedral, deep beneath Pine Mountain. The debate lasted 3 days. Some wanted to fight, to defend their territory. Others wanted to flee deeper into the wilderness. But a third faction, led by Rachel Stacey and others who had developed the most extreme adaptations, proposed something else entirely. Full integration with the cave systems, permanent withdrawal from the surface world. The blue people had been exploring the caves beneath the Kentucky mountains for generations, but what Rachel's faction proposed was different. They would adapt to become fully subterranean, using their unique biology to survive in an environment where normal humans couldn't follow. The caves went deeper than anyone had mapped, connecting to vast underground chambers and rivers. Down there they could create a civilization completely separate from the surface world. The community split. About half chose to remain on the surface, adopting better camouflage techniques and stricter isolation protocols. The other half, roughly 150 individuals, followed Rachel Stacey into the depths. What happened to them down there remains one of the most disturbing aspects of this entire story, because some of them eventually came back, and they were no longer entirely human. Those who stayed on the surface faced their own challenges. The early 1900s brought roads, telephones, and government documentation. It became harder to remain completely isolated. Some of the lighter-skinned blue people attempted integration, claiming their coloration was due to heart conditions or other medical issues. A few succeeded in establishing normal lives, carefully hiding their true nature and origins. but most remained in hiding, watching the modern world encroach on their territory. In 1912, Luna Fugate was born, the child of two deeply blue-skinned parents who had been first cousins. Luna was different from birth. Her skin wasn't blue at all, it was translucent. You could see her veins, her organs, the movement of blood through her body. But more disturbing, she seemed to exist partially outside normal space. Objects would pass through her if she wasn't concentrating. She could walk through walls if she focused hard enough. The blue people didn't know what to do with her. She was either their salvation or their doom. The surface dwellers developed new strategies for survival. They created false identities, forged documents, and established a network of safe houses throughout Appalachia. They learned to use makeup and clothing to disguise their skin color for necessary trips to towns. But they also developed something else, a kind of biological control over their condition. Through meditation and specific dietary practices, some could temporarily suppress the blue coloration, appearing normal for hours or even days at a time. This ability to change their appearance became crucial in 1917 when America entered World War I. Draft boards were searching the mountains for eligible men. The blue people had to choose between revealing themselves or finding ways to avoid conscription. Most chose elaborate deceptions, creating medical conditions that would disqualify them from service. But a few of the younger generation, tired of hiding, attempted to enlist. Their medical examinations created records that would later become part of the evidence the government would use to track them. Patrick Ritchie was one who tried to serve his country. His skin was only slightly blue, what he could explain as poor circulation. But the physical examination revealed abnormalities that went far beyond skin color. His blood contained hemoglobin variants unknown to medical science. His resting heart rate was 20 beats per minute. His lung capacity was nearly double that of a normal human. The military doctors were fascinated and wanted to study him further. Patrick disappeared that night and was never seen again. The official record listed him as a deserter, but the blue community knew better. They had eliminated him themselves rather than risk exposure. By 1920, the blue people on the surface numbered about 180 individuals. They had adapted to the modern world while maintaining their isolation, but the strain was showing. Mental illness was increasing. Suicide rates were climbing. The younger generation was restless, tired of hiding, tired of being told they were special but having to live like criminals. Some began to deliberately expose themselves, appearing in towns without disguises, terrifying locals who reported seeing blue demons or walking corpses. The elders instituted harsh punishments for these violations: public flogging, exile, and in extreme cases, execution. The blue community was eating itself from within, paranoia and fear destroying the bonds that had held them together for a century. It was during this period of chaos that the first explorers returned from the deep caves, and what they had become changed everything. In 1923, 5 individuals emerged from a cave entrance that had been sealed for over a decade. At first, the surface blue people didn't recognize them as their own kind. Their skin was no longer just blue but had taken on a bioluminescent quality, glowing with a soft internal light. Their eyes had enlarged to nearly twice normal size, adapted for the absolute darkness of the deep caves. But the most disturbing change was in their behavior and communication. They no longer spoke in any recognizable language. Instead, they produced sounds at frequencies that normal humans couldn't hear, communicating through ultrasonic vibrations that the other blue people could barely perceive. When they did attempt human speech, they told of vast underground cities, of thousands of blue people who had continued evolving in isolation, of technologies based on biological manipulation rather than machinery. They claimed the deep dwellers had discovered the source of their condition, not just a genetic mutation, but something older, something that predated human civilization. According to these returned explorers, the blue condition was caused by exposure to a unique mineral found only in certain cave systems. This mineral, which they called bluestone, had been changing human DNA for thousands of years, creating pockets of evolved humans throughout history. The Blue People of Kentucky were just one branch of a much larger phenomenon. There were others in the Carpathian Mountains, in the Andes, in the Himalayas, all hidden, all evolving along different paths. The surface Blue People were divided on how to respond to this revelation. Some wanted to join their deep-dwelling kin, to embrace their evolution fully. Others saw it as a corruption of their humanity, a step too far from what they were meant to be. The community split again, with about 50 individuals choosing to descend into the caves, following the luminescent guides into the depths. They were never seen again, though sometimes on quiet nights, residents of nearby towns reported hearing strange harmonics emanating from the mountains, songs in frequencies that made their teeth ache and their vision blur. The 1930s brought the Great Depression, and with it, government programs that reached even the most isolated communities. The Civilian Conservation Corps, the Works Progress Administration, and other New Deal programs sent workers into the mountains to build roads, schools, and clinics. The Blue People faced their greatest threat yet, systematic government intrusion into their territory. They adapted by creating an elaborate warning system. Lookouts stationed on peaks could signal the approach of strangers using mirrors during the day and fires at night. When government workers arrived, they would find abandoned homesteads, as if the residents had vanished moments before. But the government was becoming suspicious. Reports accumulated of blue-skinned individuals, of abandoned settlements with signs of a recent habitation, of strange lights and sounds in the mountains. In 1936, a secret task force was created within the Public Health Service to investigate what they termed the Blue Mountain Anomaly. The task force included doctors, anthropologists, and military intelligence officers. Their mission was to find and document the Blue People, to determine if they posed a threat to national security. The investigation was led by Dr. Marcus Webb, a geneticist who had been studying unusual human variations for the military. Webb was brilliant but ruthless, convinced that the Blue People might hold the key to creating enhanced soldiers. He established a base of operations in Hazard, Kentucky, and began systematic sweeps of the mountains. The Blue People were forced to abandon many of their surface settlements, retreating to emergency camps deep in the wilderness. But Webb was persistent. He interviewed locals, collecting stories and rumors. He analyzed geological surveys, looking for patterns in the cave systems. He even recruited local hunters and moonshiners as informants, offering rewards for information about blue-skinned individuals. In September 1937, Webb's team achieved a breakthrough. They captured a blue-skinned child who had become separated from his family during a relocation. The boy, who appeared to be about 8 years old but was actually 14, was taken to a secret medical facility in Lexington. The experiments conducted on him over the next 3 months were horrific. Blood samples, tissue biopsies, exposure to various chemicals and radiation. The boy, whose name was Timothy Combs, died in December 1937. But not before Webb had learned enough to terrify him. The Blue People weren't just genetically different, they were potentially a separate species. Their DNA contained sequences that didn't exist in normal humans, what appeared to be engineered modifications that predated known history. Their blood could carry 3 times the oxygen of normal blood. Their bones were composed of a calcium matrix that was nearly unbreakable. Their neural tissue showed patterns of activity that suggested enhanced cognitive abilities, particularly in pattern recognition and collective communication. Webb's report, classified above top secret, concluded that the Blue People represented either an ancient civilization's genetic experiments or evidence of non-human intervention in human evolution. He recommended immediate containment and further study. But before the government could act on his recommendations, the Blue People struck back. On the night of January 15, 1938, every member of Webb's task force died simultaneously. The official report blamed a gas leak at their hotel, but the truth was far stranger. The Blue People had developed a biological weapon, a modified version of the fungi that grew in their caves. When released into the ventilation system, it caused massive organ failure in normal humans, while leaving blue people unharmed. It was a warning. Leave us alone or face the consequences. The government backed off officially. The task force was disbanded, its records sealed, but unofficially, surveillance continued. The Office of Strategic Services, predecessor to the CIA, maintained a file on the blue people. During World War II, there were even discussions about recruiting them for special operations, their unique abilities making them perfect for certain missions. But the blue people had learned their lesson. They would never again trust outsiders. The post-war period brought new challenges and opportunities. The 1950s saw massive migration from rural areas to cities. Some younger blue people, tired of isolation, attempted to join this exodus. They used advanced makeup techniques, claimed medical conditions, and tried to blend into urban populations. A few succeeded, establishing normal lives, careers, and even families with non-blue partners. But most found the stress of constant disguise unbearable and returned to the mountains. Luna Phogat, the translucent child born in 1912, had become the de facto leader of the surface blue people by 1955. Now in her 40s, but appearing much younger due to her unique physiology, she had developed her abilities to an extraordinary degree. She could phase in and out of visibility, travel through solid matter, and even exist in multiple locations simultaneously for brief periods. Under her leadership, the blue people developed new strategies for survival in the modern world. They established legitimate businesses as fronts for their activities. Mining companies that allowed them to control access to their cave systems, herb farms that provided cover for their movements in the mountains, even a few medical clinics that served both normal humans and blue people, carefully managing the records to hide any anomalies. Luna understood that complete isolation was no longer possible. Instead, they would hide in plain sight, using the complexity of modern society as camouflage. In 1960, a young hematologist named Madison Coween arrived in Kentucky, interested in unusual blood conditions he had heard about in the region. Unlike previous investigators, Coween approached with genuine medical curiosity rather than exploitation. He managed to gain the trust of some of the lighter-skinned blue people who had been living on the margins of normal society. Through them, he was introduced to others, eventually meeting members of the core families. Coween's approach was respectful and scientific. He wasn't interested in exposing or exploiting the blue people, only in understanding their condition and possibly helping those who wanted to appear more normal. He identified the enzyme deficiency that caused the blue coloration and developed a treatment using methylene blue, ironically a blue dye that could temporarily restore normal skin color. But Coween discovered much more than he ever published. In his private notes, found only after his death in 1985, Coween documented biological variations that went far beyond simple enzyme deficiency. He described individuals who could see into the ultraviolet spectrum, others who could generate electrical fields strong enough to disrupt electronics, and some who showed signs of what could only be called telepathic communication. He theorized that the blue people represented not a medical curiosity, but an evolutionary branching point, humanity developing in a different direction. Most disturbing were his notes about the deep dwellers, those who had retreated permanently into the cave systems. Through careful interviewing of surface blue people, Coween had learned that the underground population had continued to evolve in radical ways. They had developed a civilization based on biological technology, growing rather than building their structures, using modified organisms for lighting and communication. They had supposedly discovered ways to alter their own genetic code at will, becoming whatever they needed to be for survival. Coween also documented the blue people's beliefs about their origins. They claimed their ancestors had been changed by exposure to something ancient in the caves, something that predated known human history. Some believed it was a gift from God, making them the next stage of human evolution. Others thought it was contamination from something alien, something that should never have been disturbed. but all agreed that they were no longer entirely human and never could be again. The 1960s and 70s brought the counterculture movement, and with it, a brief period when being different was almost celebrated. Some blue people attempted to emerge during this time, claiming their appearance was due to spiritual practices or experimental lifestyles. A few even became minor celebrities in certain circles, though they were careful never to reveal the full truth of their nature. But the tolerance was superficial and temporary. When the culture shifted back toward conformity in the 1980s, the blue people retreated again. During this period, the government's interest was rekindled. The CIA's MKUltra program included several sub-projects investigating the blue people. Agents attempted to infiltrate their communities, to steal biological samples, to identify individuals who might be recruited for intelligence work. Most of these efforts failed, but not all. Several blue people did work for the government during the Cold War, their unique abilities making them invaluable for certain operations. Their stories remain classified, but hints can be found in redacted documents about agents who could survive in environments that would kill normal humans, who could pass through security systems undetected, who could communicate in ways that couldn't be intercepted. The 1990s brought DNA testing and genetic mapping, technologies that terrified the blue people. Now their differences could be documented at a molecular level. They could be identified through a simple blood test. Some advocated for complete withdrawal from surface society. Others argued for integration, revealing themselves and demanding recognition as a minority group deserving protection. The debate split families and communities that had survived for centuries. In 1997, a group of younger blue people attempted to go public. They held a press conference in Lexington, revealing their skin color and claiming discrimination. The media treated it as a hoax, a publicity stunt. The individuals involved were dismissed as performance artists or mentally ill. The blue community learned that the modern world's skepticism could be a shield. People would refuse to believe the truth even when it was directly in front of them. Tell me in the comments if you believe this story could be real, because what happened next suggests that someone very powerful believes it is. In 2001, following the September 11 attacks, the Department of Homeland Security initiated a comprehensive survey of potential biological threats within the United States. The blue people were included in this assessment. A joint task force from the CDC, NIH, and DARPA spent 3 years studying all available evidence about the blue people. Their conclusions, leaked by a whistleblower in 2008, were shocking. The blue people were classified as a potential bioweapon. Their ability to survive in extreme conditions, their resistance to many diseases, and particularly their development of biological technologies in the cave systems, made them a significant concern. The report recommended continued surveillance but no direct intervention, fearing that confrontation could trigger a biological attack that normal humans couldn't defend against. It also noted that the blue people's population was declining. Inbreeding had reached critical levels. Many children were being born with deformities that even their evolved biology couldn't compensate for. Without fresh genetic material, they would likely extinct themselves within a few generations. But the report also contained a more disturbing possibility. The deep dwellers, those who had retreated into the caves decades earlier, might have found a solution. Satellite thermal imaging had detected heat signatures deep beneath the mountains that suggested a population much larger than expected. Seismic sensors had recorded regular patterns that could be machinery or could be something biological on a massive scale. Whatever was happening in the deep caves, it was organized, it was extensive, and it was growing. In 2010, an earthquake struck eastern Kentucky, causing several cave entrances to collapse. Rescue teams reported finding passages that led to vast underground chambers filled with bioluminescent organisms, structures that appeared to be grown rather than built, and sounds that suggested a large population somewhere deeper in the system. But when specialized teams returned to investigate, the passages had been sealed from within. The blue people, or whatever they had become, didn't want visitors. The surface blue people, those who still maintained some connection to normal society, numbered fewer than 100 individuals by 2015. They had adapted to the digital age, using technology to maintain their hidden networks. They had established a presence on the dark web, trading information and resources, coordinating their survival strategies. Some had integrated completely into normal society, their children showing only the slightest blue tinge that could be explained by various medical conditions. But they maintained their connection to the community, to the ancient knowledge and traditions that had kept them alive for 200 years. Rachel Stacey, the woman who had led the first retreat into the caves, would be over 120 years old if she were still alive. But reports from the deep places suggest she's not only alive but has become something beyond human comprehension. Described as a biological node in a vast underground network, she supposedly exists as both an individual and part of a collective consciousness that spans hundreds of miles of cave systems. Through her, the deep dwellers coordinate their activities, plan their future, and remember their past. The blue people keep detailed genealogies, tracing their bloodlines back to the original families. These records, written in their evolved language that combines English, French, and ultrasonic harmonics, tell stories that academic historians would dismiss as fantasy. They speak of ancient contacts with beings that came from the deep earth, of technologies based on living systems rather than machines, of a time when humans were more diverse, more adaptable, more capable of change. Modern blue people face an impossible choice: reveal themselves and risk becoming laboratory subjects or tourism attractions, remain hidden and watch their unique culture and biology slowly fade away, or follow their kin into the deep places, abandoning their humanity entirely for something unknown. Each year, a few more choose the third option. They hold ceremonies at cave entrances saying goodbye to the sun and descend into darkness from which they never return. The government maintains its surveillance. Satellites monitor the mountains. Seismic sensors track underground movements. Biological hazard teams stand ready to respond if something emerges from the caves. But mostly, there is silence, an uneasy truce between two branches of humanity that diverged 200 years ago and continue to grow further apart. In 2018, a group of spelunkers exploring an unmapped section of Mammoth Cave reported finding ancient paintings that depicted blue-skinned figures interacting with normal humans. The paintings, which appeared to be thousands of years old, suggested that the blue people phenomenon was much older than anyone had imagined. Carbon dating of pigments confirmed the age, but when researchers returned to study the paintings in detail, they had been destroyed, apparently dissolved by some kind of biological agent that had been triggered by exposure to light. The same year, water samples from springs throughout eastern Kentucky showed trace amounts of unknown organic compounds. These compounds, when analyzed, appeared to be synthetic pheromones designed to trigger specific behavioral responses in humans. The blue people, or whatever they had become in the deep places, were potentially capable of chemical manipulation of surface populations. The discovery triggered a classified assessment of the threat level, but no action was taken. What could be done against an enemy that had been preparing for 200 years and existed in an environment where normal humans couldn't survive? Local hospitals in Kentucky still occasionally report patients with unusual blood conditions, children born with slightly blue skin who disappear from the system before follow-up appointments, adults who present with impossible physiological readings then vanish from their hospital beds. The medical establishment has learned not to ask too many questions. Some knowledge is dangerous to possess. The blue people's surface settlements, those few that remain, are protected by more than isolation now. They use biological deterrents, organisms that create zones of discomfort for normal humans, plants that release spores causing temporary blindness, fungi that generate ultrasonic frequencies that trigger deep evolutionary fear responses. The mountains themselves have become weaponized, defending their inhabitants through biological warfare on a microscopic scale. In 2020, during the COVID-19 pandemic, something interesting happened. the blue people were completely unaffected. Their altered biology, their different hemoglobin structure, their unique immune systems made them immune to a virus that killed millions of normal humans. This raised disturbing questions. If they were immune to COVID, what else were they immune to? And conversely, what diseases might they carry that their bodies could tolerate but that would devastate normal human populations? The pandemic also provided cover for increased blue people activity. With everyone wearing masks, staying isolated, avoiding contact, the blue people could move more freely than they had in decades. There were reports of blue-skinned individuals appearing at hospitals, offering to donate blood that might hold the key to coronavirus immunity. But when medical staff tried to find these donors later, they had vanished, leaving only blood samples that defied conventional analysis. Current estimates suggest there are between 50 and 100 surface-dwelling blue people left in Kentucky, but the deep dwellers, those who retreated into the cave systems, might number in the thousands. Thermal imaging suggests vast populations in chambers miles beneath the surface. Seismic data indicates they're expanding, creating new spaces, possibly preparing for something. The blue people who remain on the surface speak of a coming emergence. They say their deep-dwelling kin have been preparing for a return, but not as humans seeking integration. They've evolved too far for that. Instead, they might emerge as something else entirely, a new species ready to claim their place in the world. Some surface blue people fear this emergence, others welcome it. All agree it's inevitable. Climate change might be the trigger. As surface conditions become more extreme, as normal humans struggle with heat, storms, and ecological collapse, the blue people's adaptations become increasingly advantageous. Their ability to survive on less food, less oxygen, their resistance to temperature extremes, their capacity for biological manipulation of their environment, all these traits position them as potentially superior survivors in a changing world. The children born to blue people in the last decade show even more extreme variations. Some can consciously control their skin color, shifting from blue to normal and back at will. Others demonstrate what can only be described as superhuman abilities, strength, speed, sensory perception beyond normal human ranges. But most disturbing are those who show signs of collective consciousness, sharing thoughts and experiences across distances, functioning as components of a larger organism rather than individuals. If you're still watching, subscribe now, because this story is about to take a turn that will make you question everything you thought you knew about human evolution and what's really happening in the hidden places of America. In 2021, a group of hikers in the Red River Gorge reported encountering what they described as a family of blue ghosts. The figures appeared translucent, shifting in and out of visibility, moving through solid rock as if it wasn't there. When the hikers' report was investigated, researchers found biological residue unlike anything in known databases. The material showed signs of being simultaneously alive and not alive, existing in a state between normal matter and something else. Analysis of this residue revealed structures that shouldn't be possible, cells that could exist in multiple states simultaneously, DNA that could rewrite itself in real time based on environmental conditions. One researcher, speaking anonymously, said it was like finding evidence of a technology so advanced it appeared to be magic, except it was entirely biological. The blue people hadn't just evolved, they had discovered how to direct their own evolution. The government's response was swift and secret. A new task force was created combining resources from the CDC, DARPA, the Department of Energy, and agencies that officially don't exist. Their mission was to assess whether the blue people represented an existential threat to normal humanity. The conclusion, reached after months of analysis, was classified beyond any normal security level. But sources suggest it contained two words that changed everything: potential replacement. The blue people weren't just a genetic variation or an evolutionary offshoot. They were potentially the next dominant form of human life on Earth. Their adaptations, particularly those developed by the deep dwellers, gave them advantages that normal humans couldn't match. In a direct competition for resources, in a struggle for survival, normal humanity would lose. This realization triggered a debate at the highest levels of government. Some advocated for preemptive action, using bunker-busting weapons to seal the cave systems, containing the threat before it could emerge. Others argued for negotiation, trying to establish formal contact and find a path to coexistence. But the majority opinion was to maintain the status quo, to watch and wait, hoping the problem would resolve itself through the Blue People's genetic bottleneck. But the Blue People were already solving their genetic diversity problem, just not in any way the government expected. In 2022, hospitals across Appalachia reported a strange phenomenon. Women were arriving at emergency rooms claiming to be pregnant despite showing no signs of pregnancy. Ultrasounds revealed nothing. Blood tests were normal, but the women insisted they could feel something growing inside them. Within weeks, these women would disappear, vanishing from their homes without a trace. Investigation revealed that all these women had one thing in common. They had visited certain caves in Kentucky as tourists. They had breathed in spores, microscopic biological agents released by the deep dwellers. These spores had implanted genetic material that was slowly rewriting their DNA, transforming them from within. They were being converted into blue people, or something beyond blue people, without their knowledge or consent. The process, once triggered, was irreversible. The women who disappeared were drawn by biological imperatives to seek out cave entrances, to descend into the deep places where their transformation could be completed. What emerged months later, if anything emerged, was no longer the person who had entered. They had become part of the collective, their individuality absorbed into something larger. This biological recruitment campaign suggested the deep dwellers were preparing for something significant. They were increasing their numbers, adding genetic diversity, creating an army of converted humans who bridged the gap between the surface and deep populations. Each converted individual brought knowledge of the modern world, skills and experiences that the isolated deep dwellers lacked. Local law enforcement, those few who were aware of the situation, were helpless. How do you stop an enemy that attacks through invisible spores? How do you protect people from caves that have been tourist attractions for decades? How do you explain to the public that a significant portion of eastern Kentucky sits above a civilization of evolved humans who might not see normal humans as equals, or even as the same species? The blue people on the surface, those maintaining the pretense of normal lives, found themselves caught between worlds. The deep dwellers considered them traitors, too corrupted by contact with normal humans. Normal humans, if they knew the truth, would see them as threats, advanced scouts for an invasion from below. Some tried to warn authorities about what was coming, but who would believe them? Blue-skinned people talking about underground civilizations and biological warfare sounded like delusion, not credible intelligence. Luna Fugate, now over 100 years old but appearing as a young woman due to her unique biology, made a decision that would change everything. She would attempt to bridge the two worlds, to find a path to coexistence before conflict became inevitable. Using her ability to phase between states of matter, she descended into the deep places, the first surface dweller to do so in decades and survive to return. What she found in the depths defied description. The deep dwellers had created a civilization that was entirely biological. Buildings grown from modified organisms that could repair themselves and adapt to their inhabitants' needs. Light provided by bioluminescent creatures that responded to thought. Air and water purified by living filters that could process any toxin. It was paradise, a nightmare combined. A world where the boundary between individual and environment had dissolved. The population of the deep places was far larger than anyone on the surface had imagined. Thousands of individuals, if they could still be called individuals, existed in various states of evolution. Some maintained roughly human form, though with dramatic modifications. Others had abandoned fixed form entirely, existing as fluid biological masses that could take any shape needed. At the center of it all was Rachel Stacey, or what Rachel Stacey had become. She was no longer a single entity, but a biological network spanning miles of cave system. Her consciousness existed distributed across thousands of organisms, each one both independent and part of her greater self. She could be everywhere and nowhere, experience everything simultaneously, process information at speeds that made normal human thought seem glacial. She had become something like a god of the deep places, and she had plans for the surface world. Through Luna, Rachel sent a message to the surface. The emergence was coming, not as invasion or conquest, but as evolution. The deep dwellers had developed a way to trigger rapid biological change in normal humans, to grant them the advantages of blue people biology without the centuries of adaptation. They offered transcendence, transformation into something beyond current human limitation. But the price was submission to the collective, abandonment of individual identity as humans understood it. The government's response was immediate and violent. Troops sealed every known cave entrance in eastern Kentucky. Scientists released targeted biological agents designed to kill organisms with blue people DNA markers. Satellites were repositioned to monitor for any underground movement toward the surface. It was a declaration of war against an enemy they didn't fully understand and couldn't effectively fight. But the deep dwellers had anticipated this response. The sealed cave entrances were decoys. The real passages to the surface were hidden, protected by biological camouflage that made them invisible to any detection technology. The biological agents released by the government were absorbed and analyzed, their genetic codes incorporated into the deep dwellers' ever-evolving immune systems. Every attack made them stronger, more adapted, more prepared for what was coming. The surface blue people faced an impossible choice. Side with normal humanity and fight against their own evolved kin, join the deep dwellers and abandon any hope of coexistence with the surface world, or try to remain neutral in a conflict where neutrality might not be possible. Families that had survived together for centuries split apart. Some fled to other countries, hoping to escape the coming conflict. Others dug in, preparing to defend their ancestral homes. A few simply walked into the caves and were never seen again. As 2023 progressed, signs of the emergence became impossible to ignore. Springs throughout Kentucky began flowing with water that had a blue tinge. Plants near cave entrances started showing mutations, growing in impossible ways. Animals that ventured too close to certain areas would return changed, their behavior altered, their biology modified. The boundary between the deep places and the surface world was breaking down. The CDC issued warnings about contaminated water sources, telling people to avoid certain areas of the mountains. But they couldn't explain what the contamination was or how to treat it. Hospitals reported increasing numbers of patients with symptoms that didn't match any known disease. Blue-tinged skin, altered blood chemistry, claims of hearing voices that weren't there, or seeing things that shouldn't exist. The medical establishment was seeing the first wave of involuntary conversions, normal humans being transformed without their knowledge or consent. Some people welcomed the changes. They reported feeling stronger, healthier, more connected to the world around them. Online communities formed of those who called themselves the Blessed, people who had been touched by the blue and saw it as improvement rather than infection. They shared techniques for accelerating the transformation, pilgrimages to caves where the effect was strongest, recipes for foods that would feed their changing biology. Others fought the transformation with everything they had. They took massive doses of antibiotics, underwent chemotherapy, even attempted amateur genetic therapy to maintain their normal human DNA. But the blue change, once started, was relentless. It rewrote biology at the cellular level, replacing normal human systems with something that might be superior but was definitely no longer entirely human. The government's task force estimated that by the end of 2023, over 10,000 people in Kentucky alone had been affected to some degree by the blue transformation. Most showed only minor symptoms, slight skin discoloration, modest changes in blood chemistry. But a significant percentage, perhaps 10%, were undergoing rapid and dramatic biological changes. They were becoming something new, something that bridged the gap between normal humans and the deep dwellers. The economic impact was devastating. Tourism to Kentucky collapsed as word spread about the blue contamination. Property values in affected areas dropped to nothing. Entire towns were abandoned as residents fled the invisible threat. But in the abandoned places, new communities formed. The transformed, those who had accepted or welcomed the change, created settlements where they could explore their evolving abilities without fear of persecution. These new communities operated on principles that normal humans found disturbing. Individuality was less important than collective harmony. Resources were shared through biological networks rather than traditional economy. Decisions were made through consensus achieved at a cellular level rather than debate. They were creating a new form of human society, one that might be more efficient, more sustainable, but was definitely alien to traditional human culture. The international community watched with growing alarm. If the blue transformation could spread beyond Kentucky, if it could cross oceans and continents, it represented a threat to human civilization as it existed. Some countries proposed nuclear strikes on the affected areas, arguing that the threat justified extreme measures. Others suggested that the transformation might be humanity's only hope for surviving climate change and ecological collapse. In December 2023, Luna Fugate made another journey to the deep places. This time, she carried a proposal from a coalition of surface blue people and sympathetic normal humans, a partition plan. The deep dwellers could have certain territories, areas where they could exist openly and continue their evolution. Normal humans would maintain control of the rest of the world. Boundaries would be established and respected. It would be coexistence through separation. Rachel Stacey's response, delivered through the biological network that Luna had learned to access, was simple and terrifying. Evolution doesn't negotiate. It simply is. We are the future. You are the past. The transition has already begun and cannot be stopped. But it need not be violent. Acceptance brings transcendence. Resistance brings obsolescence. Choose. The message spread through the blue people community and beyond. Some saw it as a threat, others as a promise. The government interpreted it as a declaration of biological warfare. Plans were made for a final solution, using weapons that had been developed in secret for decades, designed specifically to target and eliminate the blue people's unique biology. But before these weapons could be deployed, something unexpected happened. On January 1st, 2024, every blue person on the surface, all 100 or so remaining individuals, simultaneously walked to the nearest cave entrance and descended into the depths. They moved as if controlled by a single will, ignoring pleas from family and friends, walking through military barriers as if they didn't exist. Within hours they had all disappeared into the deep places. The surface population of blue people had voluntarily ended. But this wasn't retreat or surrender. It was consolidation. The deep dwellers were gathering their strength, preparing for something that would make all previous emergence seem like minor incidents. Seismic sensors detected massive movement beneath the mountains. Thermal imaging showed heat signatures consistent with a population of millions, not thousands. Whatever was happening in the deep places was accelerating. Then, in February 2024, the real emergence began. Not in Kentucky, but simultaneously in cave systems around the world. The Carpathians, the Andes, the Himalayas, the Alps, even urban cave systems beneath major cities. Blue-skinned figures emerged, but these weren't the hidden populations that had existed in isolation. These were normal humans who had been transformed over the previous months, activated by some biological signal, called to join their new species. The transformation had been spreading invisibly, carried by air currents, water systems, even international travel. Millions of people worldwide carried dormant blue genetics, waiting for activation. When the signal came, they began to change. Within days, hospitals were overwhelmed with transformation cases. Within weeks, entire cities had populations that were part blue, part normal, and part something in between. Governments tried to maintain order, but how do you govern a population that's becoming something other than human? How do you enforce laws when some citizens can phase through walls, communicate telepathically, or survive without food for months? How do you maintain an economy when a growing percentage of the population no longer needs traditional resources? The Deep Dwellers didn't attack or invade in any traditional sense. They simply emerged and existed, demonstrating by their presence that the old world was ending and a new one was beginning. They offered no violence to those who didn't resist, but they also made no accommodations for normal human society. They lived according to their own biological imperatives, their own collective consciousness, their own evolutionary path. Some normal humans fought back, forming resistance movements, trying to develop weapons that could harm the transformed. But every weapon was eventually absorbed, analysed and countered by the collective biological intelligence of the Deep Dwellers. Others tried to wall off the transformed, creating pure human zones where the blue influence was supposedly excluded. But the transformation could occur spontaneously in anyone who'd been exposed, and exposure was nearly universal. A third group, perhaps the largest, simply accepted the new reality. They took the transformation when it came, joined the collective when invited, abandoned their individual human identity for something they were told was greater. Whether it was actually greater or simply different was a question that no one who hadn't transformed could answer, and no one who had transformed seemed interested in discussing. By the summer of 2024, the world map had to be redrawn. Certain areas were now blue territories, where the transformed lived according to their own biological principles. Other areas remained nominally normal human, though the population was constantly declining through transformation, voluntary or otherwise. The boundaries between these areas were fluid, constantly shifting as the transformation spread. Kentucky, where it all began, had become something unrecognizable. The entire state was now considered blue territory. The mountains glowed at night with bioluminescent organisms. The caves breathed with a rhythm that suggested a single vast organism rather than a geological formation. The original Blue People families, the Fugates, Combseys, Smiths, Staces, and Richies, were remembered as prophets or pioneers, the first to embrace what humanity was becoming. But were they still human? The transformed insisted they were, just evolved, improved, adapted for a changing world. Normal humans saw them as something else, a replacement species that wore human form but thought and acted according to alien principles. The truth, as always with evolution, was probably somewhere between. They were what humanity was becoming, whether humanity wanted to become it or not. As I record this in late 2024, the transformation continues to spread. Scientists estimate that within a decade, normal humans will be a minority on Earth. Within a century, they might not exist at all, absorbed into the collective consciousness of the transformed or extinct from inability to compete with their evolved cousins. The Blue People of Kentucky, who began as a small family with a genetic quirk, have become the template for humanity's future. The deep places beneath Kentucky are no longer hidden. Tours are offered to those brave enough to descend, to see the biological cities, the living architecture, the transformed humans who exist in states that challenge our understanding of life itself. Some who take these tours return unchanged, speaking in awed whispers of what they've seen. Others return with blue-tinged skin and distant eyes, the transformation already beginning. And some don't return at all, choosing to remain in the depths, to join the collective, to abandon their individual humanity for something they claim is transcendent. Rachel Stacey still exists in the deep places, though existence might not be the right word for what she has become. She is the network, the consciousness that connects millions of transformed individuals across the globe. Through her, or it, the transformed coordinate their activities, share their experiences, evolve their capabilities. She is mother, goddess, and internet combined, a biological singularity that some worship and others fear. Luna Phagot, the last of the surface blue people to maintain her individual identity while accessing the collective, serves as an interpreter between the two branches of humanity. She claims the transformed mean no harm to normal humans, that the evolution is natural and necessary, that resistance is not only futile but self-destructive. But her words carry the harmonics of the collective, the ultrasonic frequencies that bypass conscious thought and speak directly to cellular memory. Even listening to her is a form of transformation. The government still maintains its task forces, its research programs, its weapons development. But everyone knows these are gestures, attempts to maintain the illusion of control over a situation that has moved beyond any human ability to control. Evolution doesn't ask permission, it doesn't negotiate, it simply happens, and those who adapt survive while those who don't become extinct. Children born in 2024 show increasing signs of spontaneous transformation. Some emerge from the womb with blue-tinged skin. Others develop the coloration in their first years. A few are born with abilities that shouldn't be possible, phasing through their cribs, communicating without words, demonstrating awareness that seems to come from somewhere beyond their infant brains. They are the bridge generation, neither fully normal nor fully transformed, carrying the potential for both futures within their developing cells. Parents face impossible choices. Try to suppress their children's transformation, knowing it might be futile and could harm them. Encourage it, preparing them for a world where normal humanity might not exist. Or simply watch and wait, letting evolution take its course. There are no right answers, only different paths to an uncertain future. Some religious groups have declared the transformation the work of Satan, a corruption of God's creation that must be resisted at all costs. Others see it as divine evolution, God improving his creation for a new age. Most simply don't know what to believe, watching their world change in ways that no scripture or science predicted. The Blue People's original secret, hidden for 200 years in the mountains of Kentucky, has become humanity's future. What began as a genetic quirk in a few isolated families has become a global transformation that might represent the next stage of human evolution, or the end of humanity as we know it. The truth won't be known until the transformation is complete, and by then there might be no one left who remembers what humanity used to be. The caves of Kentucky still call to people, drawing them with subsonic frequencies that speak to something deep in human DNA. Those who answer the call descend into darkness and emerge changed, if they emerge at all. The mountains glow with bioluminescent life that shouldn't exist. The streams run blue with organisms that rewrite the genetics of anything they touch. The very air carries spores that might trigger transformation in those who breathe them. This is no longer a story about the Blue People of Kentucky. This is a story about what humanity is becoming, willingly or not. The isolation that protected the Blue families for 2 centuries has ended. The secret has been revealed. The transformation has begun. And somewhere in the deep places beneath the mountains, Rachel Stacey and the collective consciousness she's become are planning the next phase of human evolution. Whether that evolution leads to transcendence or extinction, whether the transformed are humanity's salvation or its replacement, whether the Blue People are blessing or curse, only time will tell. But one thing is certain. The world that existed before the Blue People emerged is ending. The world that's being born in its place will be blue, in all its meanings, forever. If you made it this far, if you heard this entire story, you need to ask yourself something. Have you been to Kentucky recently? Have you visited any caves? Have you noticed any slight changes in your skin color, your perception, your connection to others? Because the transformation doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it begins so subtly that you don't notice until it's too late to reverse. Sometimes, by the time you realize you're changing, you no longer want to stop. Subscribe to this channel if you want to hear more stories about the hidden truths of our changing world. Hit the notification bell to be alerted when I reveal what's really happening in other isolated communities across America. because the blue people of Kentucky were just the beginning. There are others out there, evolved in different ways, adapted to different environments, preparing for their own emergence. The question isn't whether they exist. The question is whether you'll be ready when they reveal themselves. And remember, every time you see someone with unusual skin color, every time you hear harmonics that shouldn't exist, every time you feel drawn to explore a cave or abandoned place, you might be experiencing the call of the transformation. Whether you answer that call is up to you. But know that the choice might not remain yours for much longer. Evolution is accelerating, the transformation is spreading, and the blue people of Kentucky have shown us our future, whether we're ready for it or not.